Okay, hello, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to dive in and get started. Hello and welcome to ISO's Technologies webinar titled Stay Safe with Jira, where we will examine one of our clients' pragmatic approach to implementing the scaled agile framework while using the power of Jira. But before we dive into today's agenda, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will make it available to all attendees. We definitely encourage questions, so please use the Zoom webinar Q&A button to submit questions, and we'll queue them up for the end of today's webinar. So a brief look at today's agenda. Thank you. We're going to start out with some brief introductions, then we'll look at some key points of SAFe, we'll look at working inside of Jira, and then we'll go beyond Jira, followed up by Q&A questions at the end of today's session. So, ISO's Technology is a consulting firm that helps teams collaborate, communicate, and work more efficiently. We're passionate about using emerging technologies to solve real-world business problems. Additionally, ISO's Technology is an Atlassian Platinum and Enterprise Solution Partner and an AWS consulting partner. Today, we'll obviously be focused on Atlassian's Jira product as we talk about this SAFe implementation. My name is Danny Riley. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at ISO's Technology, and I'd like to invite today's panelists to introduce themselves.
So my name is Rodney West. I am a functional lead and Atlassian consultant at ISO's Technology. I will be mainly facilitating this presentation, answering some questions, and you'll also hear my voice as we go through in some of the screen captures we've included as part of the presentation.
Hi, my name is Bob Wen. I'm an Atlassian support engineer and consultant with ISO's Technologies. I am a certified Scrum Master and an SPC, a SAFe program consultant. So I'll help provide some background on what exactly SAFe is.
Hey everybody, my name is Tracy Walton. I'm a functional lead and Atlassian consultant here at ISO's Technology. I've been using the tools since about 2012. I'm an Atlassian fangirl, and I'm real excited to be here and talk to you guys today.
So first we're going to be getting into the key points of SAFe. Basically, Bob is going to discuss at a very high level some SAFe concepts, the who, when, and how. That provides some foundation for what Tracy will be covering when she talks about the challenges the client encountered whenever they were using Jira as their SAFe tool and how ISO's helped them work through those challenges. As I noted a moment ago, you'll also see some screen captures through the presentation that emphasize some of the points that we're going over. And as Danny said, if you have questions going through this, please use the Zoom tool to raise those, and we'll be answering those at the end of the session. With that, I am going to go ahead and pass the ball over to Bob.
Thanks, Rodney. Now, when most people start their SAFe transformation journeys, the first thing that they do is they go to www.scaledagileframework.com. And from there, the first thing that they see is what is known as the big picture. Now, what we're showing you right now is one of the 4 big pictures that you can see from the Scaled Agile Framework website. And as you can see, this diagram is really pretty busy. It's got a lot of moving parts, and it can be pretty off-putting to any new adoptees. So what we'll try to do is kind of distill the essential elements of SAFe down to who, when, and how. So first, let's start with the who. Now, most of the time, teams that are coming in will be an agile team. They may have a cross-section of members, people from business, from hardware, from software, some testers, and they'll be part of a self-managed cross-functional team. Now, SAFe takes this core concept of this cross-functional self-managed team and extends it by bundling together these teams into an agile release train. Now, one of the key people, or some of the key people on this agile release train, are going to be the lean agile leaders. Now, they're responsible for making sure that the journey this agile release train goes on is agile. They'll be responsible for training and making sure that the teams stay cross-functional and self-managed. They're also there to remove any organizational roadblocks. Now that we have an idea of who's on our agile release train, let's take a look at when this art is performing safe. Now, if you're on an agile team, you typically do your work in cadence. In other words, on sprints of either 2 to 4 weeks. And you typically start with a planning session, do the work, and then at the end have a demo and retrospective. SAFe continues that, but SAFe also bundles these iterations and making sure that all of the teams have these sprints or iterations of the same length, so that anything that one team delivers in sprint 2 can be taken up by any other teams on that agile release train that depend on that feature that was just delivered in later sprints. Now, these sprints are bundled together into a program increment, where at the beginning of the program increment, there is a PI planning meeting where all of the teams on the agile release train, as well as the stakeholders, architects, possibly UX people, gather together, identify commitments that the teams will work on, as well as any risks and dependencies. And once those are identified and worked through or collaborated with the other teams, then the teams set to work during to their sprints to plan, do, check, and adjust. Now, the last sprint, the 5th sprint in the program increment, is a little special. That is completely dedicated to improving the art through a system demo, an inspect and adapt workshop, and then the PI planning meeting for the next PI. Now let's take a look at how our agile release train works safe during the program increments. So the first thing that you want to see is on the top left. We'll talk about how each agile team is going to deliver their stories and ultimately their features within the sprint. And this is where the deployment happens whenever it's ready. The teams will go through, they will use a DevOps approach where there is going to be a continuous integration component where work is, as soon as work gets checked in, it can be run by automated tests in a continuous delivery pipeline. As soon as it passes those tests, it may move on to the next stage for continuous deployment, where those items get deployed out to the environments as needed. While this is going on, product management is working continuous exploration, making sure that the next needed stories or the next needed features are ready and available for either the next sprint or ultimately the next PI. Now, one thing about SAFe, and that is something that you'll see on the bottom, architectural items are given the same weight as those features that deliver value. Now, these architectural items are going to be planned within the PI as enablers so that they can be delivered before any feature that depends on those enablers can use them. And so you create an architectural runway where enablers build up the runway, features tear down that runway. And finally, we have to talk about principles, and that's at the top right. The easiest way of moving away from any agile methodology, not just SAFe, is to do just the practices blindly without looking at the underlying mindset and principles. So this is where Lean Agile leaders have to communicate that Lean Agile mindset and the SAFe principles so that the art is kept on the right track, if you'll pardon the pun. So we hope this gives you a better view of what goes on in SAFe. Let's go back to Rodney.
Okay, thank you for that quick overview of SAFe, Bob. Now we're actually going to be moving into the Jira portion. As a note, if anybody wants to learn more about SAFe, we encourage you to visit the Scaled Agile Framework website, where you'll find all of the information and diagrams that you actually need to implement SAFe on your site, or to get training, whatever you need. With that, I'm going to actually turn things over to Tracy, who is going to speak about the client's challenges with SAFe inside of Jira and how we address those items.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Rodney. Yep, so I'm going to take you on a little bit of the journey that we shared with our client in their adoption of SAFe and using Jira. So, you know, their journey is something like this. You know, they went out and chose SAFe to support the growth of their organization, right? They were looking to scale. They had teams around the globe. They had already adopted Agile practices within individual teams, but they were really looking to SAFe to enable them to kind of extend those practices to a higher level, right? To a program level or a portfolio level. And like Bob said, you know, they're looking to increase their productivity, increase their quality, and speed up the time to market at scale, and not just from one team to another. So they went out and they decided to adopt SAFe. They went out and got their training, and they came back to the office and were ready to get going, and realized real quickly that, you know, Jira was the tool of choice for their teams, but it wasn't really in a state that was ready to roll out SAFe as a methodology in their organization. So ISOS came in to assist them and work through some of those challenges and get Jira into a state that they could really, you know, get SAFe rolling in the organization. So we're going to go through, you know, some of those challenges and how we overcame those. You'll notice, you know, as we talk through some of these, that there's a lot of general best practices with Jira if you're implementing SAFe or otherwise. And of course, we'll talk to some very specific SAFe integrations with Jira as well. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And we'll talk about reference projects in Jira. So one of the first conversations that we had was around Jira projects, right? So Jira projects are essentially buckets of issues, and they can be set up in organizations, you know, differently, right? So some people organize their Jira projects by a department, right? So you have like a marketing department Jira project, or an HR department Jira project, or they'll line them up to specific initiatives or projects that have a start and an end, or line them up to products. So our client had been using Jira such that their projects were lined up to their teams. And we're going to see as we go along how that kind of just muddied up and created some confusion. But we had a conversation with them about how they're, you know, how can we really best set up Jira to get you guys running successfully? And the answer to that question was lining their Jira projects up one-to-one with the products in the organization. Now, they had 30-ish products, and you know, when we had that conversation, their eyebrows kind of went up, right? There was a little bit of resistance to that because they had 5 or 6 teams, and you know, 5 or 6 Jira projects seemed manageable. But 30 Jira projects did not seem, you know, manageable. There was resistance around, okay, well, how are we going to handle this administrative overhead and keep the configuration consistent across these projects? So the answer to that really was creating a reference project. And what we mean by reference project is a Jira project that has the schemes, all the configuration set up just right. And you can use that reference project as a template to create all the other projects. And then later, if you have a change that you want to be sweeping across all of your projects, you can do that with the shared configuration. So in doing that, it really set the client up for a speedier adoption of SAFe, right? Because we didn't want the teams, who were going to be working in Jira caught up in, a different experience from one Jira project to another. We wanted them to focus on adopting SAFe and not struggling with the tool. So let's take a minute. Rodney's going to show us a little demo on how to do this in Jira, create a Jira project with the shared configuration.
Using reference projects in Jira allows us to leverage shared schemes, simplifying process adoption, administration, and governance. To begin, create a layout for a reference project that matches your processes. For this example, we've created a project called Scrum Reference Project. Take note of the issue type scheme, workflow scheme, and screen scheme. Now we will create a new project that shares these schemes. Go into your projects menu, choose Create Project. You can ignore all of the options at the top. What is important to you is the Create with Shared Configuration option. Choose this. Now we are going to choose our sample project. We are going to call our child project Demo Scrum Project 1. Submit. We now have a new project. If we look under project settings, under the summary, you will notice that the issue type scheme, workflow scheme, screen scheme is the same as our reference project. Okay, let's head on back to Tracy.
All right, thanks for that. All right, so we've kind of tackled that issue with the projects being lined up one-to-one with products. And then we also ran into what I'm calling myth number one, which is that boards need to be lined up one-to-one with a Jira project. So, our client just simply had a misunderstanding about how the boards can be set up in Jira, and it made it a little more apparent as to why the Jira projects were lined up to teams, because of course the teams are the ones using the boards to track their work, and if you had the understanding that board, you needed a board in every project, then you're going to set your project up to line up with your teams. So that was one of the first myths that we debunked. Excuse me. And the other myth that we debunked was that each board could only have issues from the project that it was created in, which is not true. You can have on your board issues from across projects. Now, again, the board is something that's representative of the commitment that the team has made to the work that they're going to complete, right? So we wanted our boards to be created to represent that and not be constrained by, having to be within a particular project or have only issues from a particular project. So when we debunked those myths or, cleared up those misunderstandings, then we could really start to configure our boards and get clearer reporting, right? Because like I said, the board is representative of the commitment of the work of the team. And your reports are based on your boards as well. So when we clean those up, our reports are definitely cleaner. And, the customer, or I'm sorry, our client had this idea that there were so many dependencies across all of their teams. And they had a really difficult time understanding who's working on what and what needs to happen first. And a lot of that confusion around dependencies came from how Jira had been set up, to line up again with teams. So when you're creating an issue, you needed to know, which team it belonged to. So in clearing up, like debunking some of those myths and clearing up how Jira was set up, it became real apparent like what the actual dependencies were, right? So let's take a minute here and have Rodney show us a little demo of creating a board with issues that cross projects.
And we are going to create an example cross-project board using the Teams and Space project and the Team Travel web project.
Before you create a cross-project board, you need a filter that covers multiple projects. So we're going to do that first. Go under Issues, choose Search for Issues, and we will put in our simple JQL filter. Project in, choose the 2 projects we want. Verify the filter works, and we will save the filter as a cross project. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and create the board. There are 2 places you can create a board in Jira. You can either create the board in one of the projects, or you can create the board from the management board. That's how we're actually going to create this one. So we go to View All Boards, top, choose Create Board. We're going to create a new Scrum board. It's important to make sure you choose board from an existing save filter. This will let us use the filter we just created a moment ago. Okay, we're going to call this cross-project board. And we're going to choose our new filter. We're going to go ahead and create the board. If we look at the issues on the board, we will notice that we have a lot of issues with the TIS key, which is the Teams in Space project. And as you scroll the board, you'll also notice issues with the web key, which is the Team Travel web project. When we go into the board configuration, we see our filter reflected here. More importantly, we see the projects that are in the board. If we add additional projects, we will see that reflected here. If we remove projects from the filter, you will see that reflected here. You can also view this board from the projects that are listed in the projects board. So let's go into the Team Travel web. You'll notice that board is shown inside of the board list. And if we go to the Teams in Space project, you'll notice it has the cross-project board
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and return it to Tracy.
Thanks, Rodney. Thank you. Yeah, that was great because, you know, the myths that we kind of debunked and the understanding that we cleared up for our client really helped them to like breathe a sigh of relief that they weren't so constrained as they thought they were. So that's great. All right, so the next place we landed, you know, you remember previously I talked about setting up a reference project in Jira, and part of the exercise of setting up that reference project is going through the configuration and taking a look at each of the schemes, right? The issue type scheme, the screen schemes, the workflow schemes, and cleaning them up. So when we landed on workflows, there was another myth that I'm calling a myth that we wanted to bust, which was that the board columns needed to be one-to-one with the workflow steps. Now, a board, if you can imagine, if you have a workflow with 10 steps in it, let's say, and your board also has one column for each status in your workflow, that's going to start to get a little more difficult to use a board, right? If you have 10 columns, you know, you want to be able to look at that board and drag your cards across and get a quick glance to the state of all of the issues that your team is committed to. It's a great place for your team to all refer to and talk about what's going on quickly and make changes and move on. So a board with a lot of columns can get close to impossible to use. So let's see. I want to talk about this too. So in your workflow, I think I've seen this with a lot of clients, not just the one we're working with here with SAFE, is that there are statuses in their workflow that are more representative of the steps that a person needs to take to do their job and less representative of the state of the work, right? So you want the latter. You want the statuses in your workflow to more line up to, well, what is the state of the work? It's in progress. It's not, you know, dictating every single step in the business process that somebody needs to take to complete the work. So with that in mind, we were able to reduce down in their workflow the number of statuses that they had. And then on top of that, we were able to go into the boards, and we'll see a little demo here how to simplify the board and use multiple statuses in each of the columns on your board and clean that up. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the steps that the statuses that we added to the workflow to assist the product management team in the coming slides, but just know that we added those in there as well. So Rodney, you want to go ahead and show us that?
Yep.
When setting up a board in Jira, there's a temptation to create a column for every status available in the project, or projects represented by the board. This can easily lead to a cluttered board, especially in the case where you have multiple workflows. You need to consider who the target audience for the board is, how they will be using the board, what information they need to extract from the board. For this example, we are going to configure a board for the team committing to the work. Product management would have their own board. For the team committing to the work, we know that the statuses they really care about are to do through done. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure this board to remove the columns that this team doesn't care about from this board. So configure, choose columns. We're going to remove open. We're going to remove in grooming, reopen, and closed. So now we have 6 statuses from the original 10. Let's take a look at our board. And you can see this is much cleaner. It has the issues that are in the statuses that this delivery team cares about. But we can do a little bit better. We know the delivery team considers in progress and in code review to be very similar. We also know they consider ready for QA and in QA to often be grouped together. So let's go back to our board. We are going to remove the in code review. And we are going to remove the ready for QA columns. Now we want to make sure that we capture the statuses that dropped off, because even though we don't want columns for those, these users still care about issues that are in those statuses. So let's put in code review to in progress. And let's put ready for QA to the in QA. And as a nicety, let's go ahead and just rename in QA to QA. Go back to our board. As you can see, we've reduced the board of 10 columns down to 4. These are basically representations of the statuses that our delivery team cares about to fulfill their sprint goals.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and return to Tracy.
Thanks, Rodney. I'm actually going to kick it over to Bob and let him talk a little bit about WSJF.
Hi, everybody. So when you want to prioritize large amounts of work, typically it comes down to a few methods. And usually the most common of these are the HIPPO method, as you can kind of see in the picture. HIPPO stands for highest paid person's opinion. In other words, whoever has a title starting with C and ending in O, they make the decision as to what the team should work on. Or it could be the squeaky wheel, the person that yells the loudest, I need this thing done right now, or in this upcoming PI. Well, SAFE takes a more economic view. It looks at cost of delay, and then it divides it by how big that particular job is. And SAFE calls this WSJF, or as I'm just going to call it from here on out, WSJF. Now, if you have cost of delay numbers from your finance department, they know what the cost of delay is going to be. That's an excellent number to use. If you don't worry about it. You can approximate a cost of delay by looking at 3 factors. So the first factor in this cost of delay is going to be the user or the business value. How much value do you expect from doing this thing? The second factor is going to be time criticality. How quickly does the user business value decay over time? Now, the third factor is called risk reduction or opportunity enablement. So even if the other 2 factors aren't very high, there's not a very high user business value, and it's not going to decay really quickly over time, is it still worth doing? Does it mitigate some risk that is known? Or does it allow the business or organization to open itself up to new opportunities? So Most of the time, people using these three factors plan it through poker in the same way that development teams use planning poker cards. They'll sum it up and then divide it by the job size or duration. So I'm going to, now that we have an idea of what WSJF is, I'm going to take it back to Tracy to show how our client implemented, or not only implemented WSJF, but used WSJF for backlog grooming.
Yep, thank you, Bob. So I'm going to talk a little bit about another challenge that our client faced, which was there wasn't a lot of adoption of the tool from the product management side. And when I say the tool, I mean Jira. The Agile teams were working from a really long to-do list that wasn't necessarily groomed and certainly didn't meet an agreed upon definition of ready for development. And so that was certainly a challenge. One of the things that we did to help, improve the adoption of the tool from the product management standpoint was give them some tools so that they can organize and groom their backlog and have some visibility into, what are the things that are brand new that we need to decide if we're willing to even consider this, and what are the things that we need to groom and get ready for PI planning. So we added a status in their workflow for them to differentiate between those two things. And then we also gave them some tools for incorporating WSJF into the backlog. The idea is really to have your backlog, not only the issues in there groomed up so that they're ready for PI planning, ready for your teams to, start working on it, but that it's in priority order. And WSJF certainly is the kind of input that product management needs to set that priority. So I'm going to go ahead and let Rodney do a little demo for us on including WSJF in your backlog.
So give me 1 second here. Just waiting for Google to load the video.
To view your new WSJF custom field on your board, you will need to actually make a change to the card layout. This will allow you to view the WSJF values while you're prioritizing your backlog and moving items into sprints. Right now, we are looking at the default Teams and Space board. You'll notice this is the fixed version and story points. So what we do is we want to go to board configuration. You want to choose your card layout. You want to choose backlog first to make sure that you see with WSJF if you're organizing your backlog and pulling items out of there. Additionally, if you want to be able to see your WSJF in the field whenever you're working on your sprints, you want to make sure you add it to your active sprints. So let's go ahead and add WSJF here. Go to add. Let's go back to the board. So now you see unordered WSJF values. Basically what we can do is just start moving these around. So we say, we want to get the higher priority ones first in here. Let's go for the larger numbers up top. In our sprints, we also see the WSJF values. Now, if we actually take a look at the active sprints, we will also see the WSJF in the bottom of the card.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and return it to Tracy.
Thanks, Rodney. That was great. So last but not least, I want to talk about a challenge I think a lot of users of Jira face as well. So like I said, we were on a journey with our client. They were implementing SAFe and they were, maturing in their adoption even of Jira. And I think it's a really common story, where somebody on a development team maybe finds Jira, gets it up and going. Everybody on the team is an admin. There's 5 or 10 of you, and you can all talk to each other. And you want to make the tool work for your team. You're excited to get going, and everybody's an admin. Well, another team down the hall finds out the tool that you're using and wants to use it as well, and they start using it, right? And more and more people are in Jira. It's growing. The number of users is growing. And it's fine that everybody's admin because, you kind of, maybe you step on each other's toes, but you handle it and you keep going. But I think there comes a tipping point in everybody's journey and maturity with using Jira, where they get to a point where it's just too difficult to organize and maintain Jira when there's so many people who have access to making changes to the configuration. So our client certainly had a similar story. Just way too many people had admin rights, and they had reached that tipping point. So what they needed was a way to kind of regulate the changes in their system. And after we had gone through all these exercises and implemented the reference projects, set up all those 30 new projects, cleaned up all the schemes, cleaned up the boards, they were definitely vested in keeping those changes in a good state and maintained. So that was, I think, the incentive that really pushed them over the edge to get a governance process in place. And governance doesn't need to be something really heavy. It really just needs to be a place where, as an organization, people can go and request changes to Jira. We recommend that you create a Jira project even in Jira, right? So Jira for Jira project, where your governance team can review the changes that people have requested to make for Jira. Maybe it's requesting new projects in Jira, changes to workflows, whatever it is, and then they can review those and make sure that those changes really line up to providing value to the business and supporting the business processes that you have in your organization. And that's really the next level where our client went to, and it's a great, best practice, I think, for any organization to have. So with that, I will hand it back on over to Rodney, move us through the agenda.
All right, thanks, Tracy. So what we're gonna talk about next is a step beyond Jira. Anybody who's used Jira knows that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. You use it with a lot of other tools, whether they're Atlassian tools or whether they're something like Salesforce or other third-party tools. And usually one of the pairings that pretty much everybody uses Jira is familiar with is the pairing of Jira and Confluence. Right? So we're going to actually go into Confluence for PI planning and how the client actually used that in conjunction with Jira to help with their safe implementation. Before we actually go into an example of actually using Confluence itself, we're going to have Bob just real quick, just talk about PI, the PI planning and the purpose.
Thanks, Rodney. So one of the hallmarks of SAFE is the PI planning meeting. You may also hear of it as big room planning. And so PI planning is a 2-day meeting, and everybody on the Agile release train gets together and they outline their commitment for the upcoming PI. Now, ideally, you want PI planning done in a big room, hence the other name, big room planning. This allows members of one team of the ART to have face-to-face conversations with members from other teams or with stakeholders, with the actual end customer if possible, or with your architecture team or your UX team. Now, our client who we were working with had a challenge with face-to-face because the organization that asked Tracy to help is globally distributed. And so to overcome these challenges, our client set up a virtual big room in Confluence and had it complete with Zoom links for the overall meeting, as well as individual team breakout meetings, and also child pages for each team. And this is something that we absolutely fell in love with, and we tried to recreate. And Rodney will play the video kind of going through our inspired Confluence big room.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. All right.
When laying out your Confluence pages for big room planning, it is important to lay out your elements in a way that is intuitive and easy to navigate. Your base program increment page should have an easy-to-find agenda that lays out how the following days will go. This page should contain links to the Zoom sessions for each day, a link to a program board, a risk board, and a confidence vote page. You can surface the information in these pages using the Confluence page include macro, though this is not a necessity. The page should also show easy to find links to the individual team pages as well as their breakout sessions. Finally, you should include a small section on additional information that may be useful for the people involved in your PI planning to complete their tasks. For your page structure, it is a good idea to have all of the pages be children of the base page. This makes it easier to copy this page to other locations, to move it if needs be. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the pages in here. So we go into our program board. And we get some basic information here for milestones, some information for the individual teams. We have our risk board where we define our role information. And then we can actually perform a confidence vote for this PI plan. And for the individual team pages, let's go into the Browns team page. You have an additional link here to the Zoom session for this group, which will be the same as the one that you find on the base page. And you will also be able to list out all of your objectives and their business values.
Okay. With that, I think we're gonna move on over to some of the questions that we have, and if you have questions while we're going through this, go ahead and toss those into the QA. We have a couple of them directly pinged to us, so I'm going to go ahead and move into the questions now. Let's see. So one of the questions for the WSJF field. What can you use to script that out?
Okay, so I'll take that because I'm actually doing this for a client that ISOS has. It really depends on what your inputs to the WSJF are going to be. Those not only your user business value, but also time criticality, RROE, risk reduction, opportunity enablement, as well as your job size. Numbers work. You can just put the numbers there. And when you do that, I wrote a blog article that used JWT, Jira Workflow Toolbox, that allows you to calculate a number field, WSJF, out of number fields. But if you're taking those factors and using them as single choice select lists, that makes the interface a lot easier for your end users, but the calculation is going to end up being scripted. So you're going to actually have to use a plugin that allows scripting to do the WSJF calculation.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Let's see, the next one. So it's about your PI planning and the work that can be done in it. It looks like what happens if all of the work that's planned in a PI session can't be completed in a single PI?
So what typically happens is for a given feature, if you take some of the stories and you get them deployed, but you don't get all of the stories that make up that feature completely implemented by the end of the PI, you typically put that PI or put that feature back in the program backlog. And I would also recommend doing a WSJF calculation. So recalculation, obviously the job size is smaller because you've actually delivered on some of the work, but you really need to see if the cost of delay is still there. And that's where it's going to compete with other features in the program backlog and their WSJF values. And so it could be that it could get pushed to the next PI, or it could just stay in the program backlog as features with higher WSJF values move on to the next PI.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Let's see. One of the other questions: did you use specific add-ons for Jira? So one of the interesting things is a lot of the functionality you need is actually already contained within Jira. You know, it's a matter of leveraging the built-in functionality for boards, for projects, for sharing schemes. You know, so a lot of the stuff is there just right out of the box. So if you're an organization wanting to implement SAFe, you know, there's a lot you can do without actually adding anything to your system. As Bob noted a moment ago, you know, there are ways to actually automate the calculation for the WSJF custom field. And you know, there are other add-ons that we can use that will add value to the system. But in general, you know, it's just good to know that a lot of this is base functionality. However, you know, with that being said, I'm going to let Tracy and Bob, you know, chime in on, you know, some plugins that may have been, you know, specific for this implementation, as well as some plugins they see that would be of potential use for future SAFe implementations. You know, there have been plugins that have come out since this client engagement that would potentially be of use. So let me go ahead and turn it back over to Bob and Tracy.
So one of the ones that I typically see that people want when they're implementing SAFe and they have Jira is, how do we replicate a program board? Now, we demonstrated using Confluence for the program board, and you could use a macro to tie together the features. You have your Jira epics as features, and you can use the included Confluence macro to pop that feature into the table of the program board. What it doesn't show you dependencies. And I think most people with SAFe experience that have done a PI or two may have that analog program board in their head where it's on a big wall. The features are sticky notes, and the dependencies are identified by using Yarn. And I think most people like it, but they may want to see what the electronic version is, especially if you know, PI planning is distributed. And there are a few that come to mind. One of my favorites that I really like for the program board just came out in general release. It's called Easy Agile Programs. And it does that replication. It gives you kind of the electronic yarn tying together your dependencies. So that's one that I really, really like.
Okay, let's go on. So one other question is SAFe. Let's see, SAFe has features, capital F, and that it's a first order object, yes, as a layer between epics and stories. And how do you handle those inside of Jira?
Okay, so what I like to do is for Jira, most people, when taking a look at Jira for SAFe, they'll typically take a look at the standard issue types, and they like the epic. The epic is kind of the end all be all for Agile in Jira, and it really does nicely tie together you know, what you want to do over a PI with the stories that you want to create, and has a nice a nice part. So there's a couple gotchas when you take that Jira epic and kind of mentally call it. Like, first, you can't change the name of the actual issue type. That creates system errors within Jira. So you can add fields, and this is what we've done for clients, is we've actually gone to the epic issue type, and we've created our our user business value, our time criticality, our RROE, and our job size as fields inside of the Jira Epic issue type, and then had the scripted field there as well as WSJF. But that's as far as we go in terms of touching the Epic. We leave the Epic name there. Now, SAFE does have an Epic where you identify a business hypothesis and acceptance criteria. And what I advocate there is just to create a new issue type there, possibly call it SAFE Epic, or use one of the older SAFE terms like Business Epic.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Bob. And I think it looks like that draws us to the end of our questions. We'll give everybody another minute or so if anybody wants to submit anything else. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next. All right. So, I know that, a lot of you asked if we were going to be sending out this presentation afterwards. We are going to be sending that out. Also, we're going to see about the little individual videos that were inside of the presentation, about getting those on our ISO's YouTube channel so that you can rewatch those if you need to see kind of the step through that we did for some of those. But outside of that, we'd like to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any questions, probably Danny would be your best, first contact here. But otherwise, you can send questions across to any of us. And with that, we'd like to thank you for attending today, and we hope this was helpful.
Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.